I decided to end up working at UVA because I've been a grad assistant at James Madison. I've been involved with bands in high school and college for, at that point, I think even 10 years. And I wanted to still stay in Virginia, but I wanted to end up staying in a career where I'd be able to end up using that band experience. And 2008, just put this in historical context, economy not that great. So I was able to, I saw the posting at UVA, the director at James Madison, Scott Rickers, that was a former student of Bill Pease, the director of the Cavalier marching band. And so I applied for the job. I ended up having a interview. I do remember it because this was when the band was still in Honesty Hall. So I remember thinking, this is a weird band office, because I was used to jamming when there was a music school, and UVA obviously UVA has a music school, but the band office and the band building as it is today didn't yet exist. So I had a good interview. I think wasn't long after the interview that I think I was offered the job and I accepted it. To fully get how I personally saw it was different, you have to get a bit of an understanding for my path in band. So in high school, I ended it was Western Wayne High School. It's a small rural high school in Pennsylvania. I think at our peak we may have had 80 members in the band, and we were never a competing band. We ended up doing like some of the music in the parks type things, but nothing really big time. When I got to Lockhaven, that was actually an even smaller band. I think we may have peaked at 60, and that it might be being generous. It was a band experience that I loved, but it was definitely very, very small, very insular, and there was a lot of camaraderie there. Then I ended up getting to JMU, and I ended up doing the marching band there and being a graduate assistant there, and having a 400 member person band. The trumpet section at JMU was bigger than my undergrad college band. So to give some idea of perspective there. So and obviously JMU's nationally renowned program. I didn't think it was going to be that fast a transition to UVA. Obviously I knew at the time that I was moving up to a different level of college athletics, but band size wasn't that different. But what was different, what was a big culture shock coming to UVA is the different advantages that Cavalier marching band, that no other band program that I've been affiliated with had, where there was some great volunteers involved with the program. Bill Pease had a great vision for what he wanted his students to get. He wanted them to have the best experience staying in a hotel like the Doubletree for band camp, and having those different activities during band camp. I think that was the biggest culture shock, along with the fact that you only got during band camp you only got one opportunity to end up practicing in the stadium, and that was a big deal. That was a specific night. That was stadium night. I think that's the only time that they practice in the stadium all year, whereas that's not what I was used to from those previous band experiences. So even though I didn't think it was going to be as much of a culture shock as it definitely was a bit of one. One of the other things that was definitely a big culture shock to me coming to UVA was, just by complete happenstance, that was the same time that a French documentary film crew ended up coming, as they wanted to end up covering the Cavalier marching band, and kind of juxtaposing that with the Virginia State University marching band. And I remember getting to go see the premiere of that. I remember working a lot with, I can't remember the name of, he wasn't the director, but he was kind of the businessman, the liaison. I remember one time during rehearsal, I think Glenn Johnson ended up driving him onto the field while the band was actually rehearsing, so I think he ended up getting some ribbing for some time to come about trying to run over the marching band. So that was definitely an interesting experience. I think in retrospect, I wish I would have paid a bit more attention to that, because filmmaking is something that ends up fascinating me, and I was obviously basically on a film set for most of for a good chunk of my first year. Well, I won't say it's best or favorite, but it was definitely a memorable experience. It was my very first football game at UVA. And we were playing USC. It was a nationally televised game. I think it was on ABC, and it was hotter than the deepest fires of Hades that day. And I remember, for some reason, I don't know if it was we didn't have enough water or Gatorade, or that because it was so hot that the band had already gone through all of it, that me and Drew Cook ended up having to go back past the sidelines back to the equipment room, wherever we were keeping the water and Gatorade at the time, and ended up carrying that back. And I'm sweating awfully, Drew's sweating awfully, and I've never had a heat stroke, and I hope I never do. I'm not saying I was close to it that day, but I think that was probably about as close as I would probably have ever gotten to being so hot and so sweaty that I wouldn't have known what to do with myself. I won't say this was a favorite, but this was probably one of the more entertaining ones. And I think the 2009, Ron Myers ends up coming up in drag, does the single ladies dance. I remember that was the year where I kind of got the shotgun with both barrels, because I remember Shanna Hoare she would not always, but often end up doing songs. She was a very good songwriter, very good guitarist, and I remember I got a couple of jabs in her song portion of Skit Night. I think the couplet that I remember was it was something the previous lines had been something about disaster, and it must all have been a ploy designed by Ed Savoy, which was tough to laugh at, but I do remember that I think it was the sax section with Nick Valerano. I think they ended up standing up for me, so I was a big fan of the sax section after that Skit Night. Very big fan, and I will say that despite the crosshairs I felt that I was put in with that one, I was certainly not the only one getting jabbed at, and I think it was a really nice way to end up having fun, letting the band let off some steam, and having people end up doing things like that. The other thing I'm sad about is because from what I've been told, previous years the staff had ended up having a skit as part of Skit Night, and I don't think either year I was there we ended up doing that, because we didn't end up arranging it in time, or there just wasn't interest. I don't remember what, but that was the one thing I was a little bit sad about. What other band camp members? There was the time where we were going to that pool, and there was a thunderstorm warning, and I remember being panicked, well, not panicked, but worried, because it was a case of guarding against the people not letting us in the pool because of the thunderstorm warning, and they were coming there one way or the other. There was nothing else to end up doing. So I think we managed to get out of it okay. Either the thunderstorm warning passed, or we ended up getting lucky. I think it ended up being okay, but I remember that being something that was momentarily stressful, but still worked out. I remember some memorable ones were when Ivan Rutherford, who was a Broadway singer, I think past classmate of Bill Pease, if I remember correctly, ended up coming, and I remember it was a Disney show, and we ended up, I think one of the, I do remember this, because this has always been one of my favorite Disney songs, and I remember thinking somebody should do this for marching band. I was fun that Sandy was the one who finally did. We ended up doing "Never Had a Friend Like Me" with Ivan, obviously doing the genie role and doing it quite well. One of the things that was definitely unique at UVA that I didn't end up knowing was the tradition of the band staff to end up dressing as a theme to end up participating in the Cavalier marching band's Halloween rehearsal. And my first year there, I remember the theme was Austin Powers, and I forget. Well, let's see here. I know that Idzier was Austin. Drew Cook was Fat Bastard. That's what he was. I think Lauren was Lauren Schmidt. I want to say she was like the Elizabeth Hurley character. I don't remember her name. Oh no, I'm sorry. Mike Idzier wasn't Austin. Mike Idzier was number 2 because he had the ear patch, the eye patch. I think Dave Knight was Austin Powers. Mr. Pease was Dr. Evil, and because I'm a little bit short, I was drafted into being Mini-Me. And I remember we fought about this for days, and I ended up saying, because he wanted me to shave my head for it. And I said, come on, if I'm doing it, you have to do it. And he said, no, I can't do that. I have to end up being a professional. And he said, I got my hair shaved to a 1 cut, which wasn't that different from his normal cut. So you've got to do this. And finally, I knuckled under, and it was Lauren Schmidt, and I think Drew may have done part of it as well, but I remember definitely Lauren Schmidt. We ended up going in to the bathroom in Honesty Hall, and I ended up getting my head shaved. I'll never do that again, but it was interesting, to say the least. And then, yes, my second year, it was a Star Wars theme. I was R2-D2, so I remember I spent about half that day painting a garbage can white and blue so I could end up doing that. And I ended up having to be on my knees all of rehearsal. It was probably one of my least favorite rehearsals. I'm trying to think. I don't know where this picture is, but I know I still have it of Pease in his Darth Vader a costume and with the Darth Vader helmet on. Drew was Chewbacca. Idzier, I think Idzier was Han. I think Julie may have been Leia. I'm not sure if Glenn was Jabba the Hutt, but it should have been. Sorry, Glenn. I do remember that my first year at the CMB was when we ended up introducing what is now known as Who Time. And it had been a tune that I think Pease had done at Western Michigan called Hot Time in the Old Town Tonight. And he ended up bringing it to the CMB because he wanted to end up adding a little something extra to the pregame. And I remember I had a role that, I'm not even sure if Pease would remember this, but I had a role in naming that because we were trying to end up coming up with different titles that song could end up having, so it would be related to UVA. And so I was like rattling off different ones off of not an actual list, but just like a mental list that I was coming up with. I wish I could remember what the other ones were, but I don't. But I remember one of them was Who Time, and that was the one that he ended up eventually going to. So that's my very small imprint in UVA CMB history. Something that is important to end up keeping in mind is that this was my first real job. I've been a grad assistant before, I'd had different campus jobs before, but this was my first real professional job. So that's on the one hand. And then on the other hand, while I'd had experience with marching bands before and knew a bit about how they operated, how they moved, I wasn't used to the different moving parts and the different the different aspects of doing that for the CMB. Because whereas with JMU, they practiced on campus, they played on campus. There wasn't a lot of transportation. A lot of the kids ended up walking to rehearsal, walking to football games. With the layout of grounds and the structure of, admittedly, a much bigger football stadium and a much bigger crowd, managing a band camp where it was people constantly going between grounds, between Cars Hill and grounds and the Doubletree, managing things like third quarter sandwiches or post game. Post-game pizza. I remember most games, especially in that second season I was there, I would end up leaving in either right as the fourth quarter started or early in the fourth quarter, and I could tell when the band was coming, other than the fact that the band would actually physically be coming, in two ways. One, I think think I had an iPod at the time where I was able to get like a radio feed, and I could end up hearing the radio announcers, and I could also tell by how the game was going and how quickly people may be coming by how many people were streaming out of the stadium, because those were not the greatest football years for UVA. So I think the challenges there were between me adjusting to that new step in my life, and it being so different from what I was used to in terms of band movement and band planning. I think that was I think the other part of that was I was following in the footsteps of Dave Knight, who was a big integral part of the program, who knew exactly who to call under any circumstance and how things fell, whereas I didn't have those advantages. And he did do his level best to end up helping me learn those things, but it's always a challenge to end up coming in after somebody who casts such a large shadow. It's definitely a very difficult professional transition for me, working in that kind of environment, working as essentially a secretary, which is not something that I think I am really personally equipped to do, but I didn't know that at the time. So I think that was what made my time there a bit difficult sometimes. And that's not to say that there weren't any good memories that I had there, as this has illustrated, I definitely do, but I think having that difficult of a transition where it was not something that I was perhaps best equipped to do made some of what I was able to do not as good as I could be. I still don't think I'm really very well equipped to be a good executive assistant, but I think if I were in that job now, I would do a lot better job, because and obviously there's age coming into that, but there's also greater sense of professional responsibility, greater sense of what it was to end up doing. As far as the band evolving over time and what's changed, so I have had an opportunity to see the Hunter Smith band building, and when I was at UVA, that was during the time where we were doing a lot of the planning for the building. So I remember working a lot with P's, and I don't think I may have been in a couple of meetings, but like setting up meetings with architects and such, and helping get that into fruition. I remember sometimes during lunch we would end up taking Cook's van and end up parking and in a place where we could watch over the construction. So it was definitely very weird to end up going from something that I had previously seen just as a big construction pit to an actual building. So that's definitely been a big change, and definitely a big deal. It looks, even while I was there, and again that was only 2 years, but even during that time the band was continuing to expand in terms of numbers, so I trust that it's continued to end up doing that. Over the course of my time at UVA, I ended up getting to see the bands from, I think I got to see UNC, I got to see Duke, I got to see Wake Forest, I think Clemson sent their band up. So I didn't get to see every ACC band, but I got to see a pretty decent number of them. And I think Georgia Tech probably also sent theirs as well. Virginia Tech, of course, I ended up seeing them as well. And the CMB were either holding their own or better than all of them. And I think that's impressive for a conference as rich in tradition as the ACC and a band as relatively new as the CMB to be able to end up saying in so short an amount of time.